Well, hello, audience. Cass, good to see you out there. Gonna just dive right into this. So, I believe I left off with the details about the Vermont project up in Guildhall and my run-in with the banking industry. Um, so after that, the team and I, because we had a pretty significant team at that time, started looking at another project. We knew we had something, and we knew we had something really valuable. And so Bob Wilkinson, who's been on the show in the past, and we yucked it up about some old memories, including Virginville, which is where we started targeting as a place to compost in bullets on racks. We would have vermicompost there, and I would harvest the fish mulm or the fish manure from a local friend who was not too far away. We just run it down in totes, 250-gallon totes as we needed it. So we started looking around, located this beautiful warehouse in Virginville that was absolutely perfect. And it was crazy. Virginville is just this really eclectic, neat old town, really small. Like, it's like throwing back into the 1800s. And it's about, I don't know, 20 minutes away from Kutztown, Pennsylvania, which is a beautiful part of Amish country right near Rodale. And so as I'm pursuing that, parallel to that, Bob Wilkinson had been bugging me to get a hold of this guy, Jeff Frank. And so I'd reached out to Jeff and talked to him about what I was doing. And he was like, "Oh my God, this is amazing. You should call it fish tea." And so that was starting the understanding of about, compost extracts and teas and how they could really utilize or be utilized in plant health and soil care and soil formation. So I got a hold of this guy, Jeff, and he and I started talking like literally every other day, if not every day, for like at least a month. And I learned about his journey. Bob had told me that when they were struggling with keeping the turf healthy at Yankee Stadium, which he built, they'd called in Jeff Frank from Long Island because he had a company or a school called the Green Gorillas, where he was teaching people how to make organic extracts from compost, and how you could treat a whole property and not only make it beautiful, save a lot of money on water, on landscaping, because you're not going to have to cut it as much. Everything's going to be healthy, so you don't have to worry about pesticides and herbicides. And so he and I became fast friends very quickly. And he was a crazy cat. I mean, I think he died like 10 times. All right. And this is no joke. He died of a heart attack. They put a pacemaker in him, and that pacemaker broke. He died again. They put another pacemaker in him. This one started discharging. Like, he'd be walking across the street and it would zap him because the heart rhythm was low, and knock him out just in the middle of the street. And fortunately, this happened a couple times, and people dragged him off the road and onto the sidewalk until the ambulance arrived. So this guy like literally died like 10 times. And the last time I called down and I spoke to his girlfriend at the time, and she's like, "Oh yeah, I'm sorry, he died last night." And I was like, "Yeah, right." And she's like, "No, seriously, Leighton, this was bad. He definitely died last night." 2 days later, I get a call. All right. That's how crazy this guy was, how powerful of a spirit he was. Needless to say, he pushed me to go meet this woman, Elaine, who I had no idea who she was. And he told me that she was going to be starting at this place called Rodale in Pennsylvania that spring, late spring, early summer. And it was a perfect opportunity for me to meet her. And he basically explained to me how he had met her in the 80s when he was taking care of the Firestone estate in Arizona. The Firestones had one of the most incredibly large-scale botanical gardens, and they had brought plants in from all over the world. Now, the Firestones were super wealthy. They actually pitched in a lot of money for Biosphere 2, which, if any of you have never heard of, it's an amazing experiment. It didn't go as well as it was supposed to. because there were some miscalculations. But bottom line is Biosphere 2 in its day was 10 times more airtight than the space station, if you can believe that. That's how much money they poured into this experiment to try to determine if we could actually colonize another planet. And they ended up locking in 6 members of a team called Biospherians for a 2-year period where, bottom line, they had no outside, they could see people outside and people outside could see them inside, but they had no interaction other than maybe a wave and a smile. And they were locked in this. Now, at some point, the balance of CO2 to oxygen began to deplete, and they had to then, at that point, start to pump in oxygen because, again, they had miscalculated how much oxygen that biospherians need versus how much CO2 the plants could use. So there was an issue there. But if you look at the actual Biosphere 2, I think it had 7 different climates, from a tropical rainforest to an ocean, an actual saltwater ocean, a high desert, a savanna, and a couple other environments. But totally cool project. I mean, I was obsessed with this when they started building it, all the way till they completed it, till I was probably in my 20s. But anyway, he was working for the Firestones in Arizona, trying to take care of these plants, and he had over 100 gardeners that were underneath him, and they kept losing plants left and right because they were using NPK fertilizers. They were dealing with pests, and again, these plants were brought to this new environment, and they weren't necessarily healthy because of the way they were handled using synthetic fertilizers. So he was struggling, and somehow, some way, he met Elaine. This is actually Dr. Elaine Ingham, and she came down and started coaching him on how to use compost and these organic practices to support these plants, including understanding the fungal to bacteria ratios, the nutrient cycling system, and he began to become extremely successful with helping the sick plants recover, dealing with the new plants as they were coming in to either replace the ones that died, or because they just were in Madagascar and fell in love with this plant, they wanted to have it back on their botanical garden. So it was quite a job. And at one point, he got so stressed out about it all that he basically quit. He just, I can't keep up with this. Between dealing with the employees not listening, and you guys keep burying me with new plants, which I have to study and understand what type of soil to be planted in and how to take care of them. And so he left and he moved back to Long Island, where he set up this Green Gorilla School and started teaching organic land maintenance care for the gardeners and the mow, blow, and go guys. And so, needless to say, he kept bugging me to go, meet this Elaine. And again, I had no idea who she was. So I called down to Rodale. Again, I don't even know what Rodale is at this point in time. And the woman that answers, I said, "Hey, there's a woman, Elaine. I believe she's either there or coming soon. Is there any way I can speak to her?" And the lady said, "Oh, sure, yeah. She's been here for a couple of days now, so she's settled in. Let me transfer you over." So Elaine picks up the phone and I say, "Hey, my name is Leighton Morrison. Jeff Frank's been bugging me to meet you for months and explain to you what I have, because I've been playing with this fish manure for, since 2008 or 9, and had a chance to really play with it as far as like putting it on plants and seeing explosive growth. And basically, try to explain to her that this is what I've got. I've got this this fish manure, and I put it on plants, and the plants explode, but I don't understand why. And I really want to learn how to handle it. And, what do I need to dilute it or not? Learn more about it. And so she said, "Well, where are you?" I said, "Well, I'm not far away. Is there any chance I can come down and meet you tomorrow?" And she said, "Sure." So I hopped in my car. At this point, I was in Connecticut. It's about a 3-hour drive down. I think I got there just before noon. And I brought her a vial of my fish manure. And so she took a drop from a pipette, put it on a microscope, and looked at it, and was just like, she took her eyes up, stared at me, and was like, what is this? And I said, well, I told you, it's fish manure, fish poo. And she put her eyes back down on the microscope and was speechless for probably, I don't know, 3, 4 minutes, which was, uncomfortable to say the least. And finally, she just picked up her head just and pushed the microscope away from her and was like, I've been studying manure for 20 years. I'm a biologist. So I don't understand. I don't understand how you got this. Oh, quiet. Excuse me, quiet. And I said, well, I built a radio flow filter so that I could take the water that was coming out of my aquaculture tank at 1,000 gallons. Hey, stop. I'm sorry, guys. You're just going to have to put up with him for now. So I built this radio flow filter so that I could filter out the suspended solids in the water tank. And I would then take that water and pump it back into the aquaculture system. So I was adding clean water back in, and the mulm or the manure would settle out into a cone bottom, and then I would collect it from there. I had a ball valve at the bottom. I just flush it out periodically. And so she's like, well, I've never heard of anybody doing this, but all I can tell you is that I've never seen so many protozoa in my life. And I'm like, well, what's a protozoa? Right? This is how, like uneducated I was in this realm. And I go, can you explain more to me? And she basically said, sure, you got some more time. I said, yeah, I can hang out tonight and, get a hotel and we'll work tomorrow. And she laughed her ass off at me. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to take that as an insult. I'm here to learn from you. So I will see you in the morning. And I came back in the morning, and that basically began what became my next 18 months of my life, spending 3 to 4 days a week down at Rodale studying under this woman, Elaine. And, you talk about being at the right place at the right time and getting a PhD on steroids, private tutoring lessons with Elaine. And it was finally I became aware of who she was. I think it was about 2 months into it. She asked me if I could stay Friday night and help her Saturday set up a microscope class. And by this point, I was okay with a microscope. Like I knew how to pull them apart, put them back together. I knew how to set them up. I knew how to do dilutions. So I was capable of handling the task of setting up. I think there was 30 or 40 microscopes for all the people coming in. And she goes, and after you set them up, can you just stay? Because, there's going to be a lot of people here. There's going to be questions. I need someone like you to go around and help people set up samples because they're probably not going to know how to do it. So I really just need support staff. I'm like, no problem, Lane. I mean, I'm very grateful for everything you've been giving me. And so I was there first thing in the morning, 7, setting up these microscopes as fast as I can. People started to roll in around 8. Class started at 9. And between 8 and 9, before she arrived, I kept hearing all these people going, oh, I can't wait to meet Elaine. I got her latest book. I'm going to have her sign it. And I was just like, who is this woman? So needless to say, we went through the whole class. And at the end of the class, pretty much everyone had left. And I was breaking the equipment down, putting it in. Some of the microscopes were for her lab there to replace older ones. So I was breaking those back down, putting in boxes so that they could be brought to the microscope lab. And I pulled her aside. I said, Elaine, I had no idea that you were this world-renowned soil biologist. Why didn't you tell me? And she laughed her ass off. And we chuckled about that story the whole time I was down there. Because it was just like, I had no idea what a big following she had and what an important discovery she had made in introducing the soil food web to the masses. Like, it was just awestruck, that this was going on, and I was getting privately tutored by her. So, obviously my attention span went to the next level in everything that she said and everything that she taught me. And we had a great relationship because when she said, "Oh, well, don't do that," I would be like, "Okay," but then I'd do it, right? Because I wanted to. I'm just a curious guy, all right. I'm a curious motherfucker. If you tell me I can't do it, then it's going to make me want to do it even more. So I started playing around with, different types of composting, compost methods. I hadn't gotten into vermicompost at that point in time. But needless to say, we had, weekly, or we back it up. That summer, she brought in, I think it was like 8 or 9 um, proteges from all over the country who, for whatever reason, she identified as a solid person to continue, disciples to continue getting the word out about the soil food web, how it worked. And so every Thursday morning, we had a meeting to discuss what we had learned, Monday through Wednesday, and what our plan was for Friday or Thursday and Friday, and to be ready for the beginning of next week. And so, I really got to, sit around and hear how she taught these, these college graduates, their understudies. And so that really kind of opened my eyes up to, the level of education that I did not have, that these kids did have. And I worked side by side with the microscope lab. One of the Troy, who I later became pretty good friends with, he kind of helped take me under my wing. He took me under his wing and started explaining to me about how to identify nematodes, how to identify different types of protozoa. Because the first time you get a microscope, why, it's a whole new. It's mind blowing. I mean, you're just like thrown into Lilliputian, where all these things moving around. You don't really know what you're looking at. It's really hard to understand the difference between some of the things that aren't moving that are alive and some things that are moving that are good or bad. Oh, seriously. How about that? I'm going to have to do something. All right. So, sorry about the interruption. So he helped me a lot in better understanding, because like a lot of the especially the girls, don't take this personal, didn't like sitting next to me in the microscope lab because I was playing with semi anaerobic things and there was odor. It wasn't like horrible, it wasn't putrid, but it definitely had a funk to it. And so I was kind of like gently but quietly ostracized into one corner. They would just get up and move down a couple stations or whatever. So I kind of figured out, maybe it's better I just stay over here anyway. As I was learning to better stabilize this manure, because I'll be honest with you, some of the places when I first collected it, it was so stinky that if you got it on your skin, it was at least 2 to 3 days before you could scrub it off. And I don't care what you were using. You could cover it up with perfume or deodorant, but the smell came right back. If you got it on your clothes, forget it. You had to throw your clothes away. So I was playing with some pretty toxic, or not toxic, but horrific smelling stuff. Again, in the beginning, at that point, by the time I was at Rodale, I'd learned to aerobically stabilize it. In other words, bubble it. Some of the products I was playing with, I could bubble for 2 to 3 weeks and never get rid of the odor, and others I could get rid of the odor pretty quick. So I started to learn that there's something going on here in the way I'm either handling it or the way I'm collecting it. So I started looking deeper into understanding the aquaculture facilities and how they were mechanically set up. And one of the first things that I learned was specifically at what's his name's place in Pennsylvania. It'll come to me. He had a wonderful facility. It was all spring fed. I think there was 12 tilapia tanks, and this is a big setup. It was a probably 50-foot, 60-foot wide barn by at least 150 feet long, with all these tanks. And again, in the past, when I was a kid, I bred a certain type of South African cichlid, and I would use plants to kind of set up the tank so it was like a, natural, so to encourage, healthy breeding and whatnot. So I had an experience with understanding how to keep fish tanks clean, how to maintain water quality, how to maintain, living plants as well as fish. So I started really looking at his facility, and I noticed that he had, like a lot of these, he called them biofilters. They're basically just beads in a 55-gallon drum that he would pour water in and then aerate. And I just noticed that there was all this muck in the bottom of them. And so I pulled him aside one day. I said, "Hey, you ever thought of, like, cleaning these?" And he goes, "Wait, I'm overworked, understaffed. Yeah, I wish I had time to clean this. I'd love to clean the sand filters as well." And I'm like, "All right, well, you know what? Let's do this. I'll come in and I'll help you, and we'll Bill Verano, that's his name. I'll help you, get this stuff up and running." And lo and behold, as each tank that we went through the process of eliminating the biofilter, because I'm like, all you're doing is collecting, the sediment that's falling out of the water as the solids are falling out of suspension and collecting at the bottom. So you're just creating these anaerobic pockets. And lo and behold, first tank got up and running, like within a few days, he noticed the fish health had gone through the roof. Like, they were crashing the feed. They were super happy to see, like, you'd stick your head over the tank and then I'll come right at you. The same experience that I had when I was, learning to rear fish, was that it was all about water quality. And so as the quality went up, and he sold in the live market. So what happened was, people would come there, or he'd load up a truck full of fish and he'd bring them into, New York City or Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, whatever, and sell it to Asians in the Asian market. Well, the Asian supermarkets, you walk in and it's, they got fish tanks on one wall, and you go up and you pick the fish that you want, and they either just euthanize it and give it to you whole, or they'll fillet it for you. And so he noticed that, like, all of a sudden, his fish section was selling out left and right because people could notice the health of the fish. And so they figured, well, if the fish looks so good and the fins and everything, the color is beautiful. Again, if you Google tilapia or search tilapia, they're pretty good looking fish. I mean, as far as like someone who had fish or kept fish, you would look at it and be like, wow, that's a neat looking fish. Come in so many different colors, blues, reds, dots, light colors, pastels. Just a really, really cool species of fish. So not only did I help him to increase value to his own product, but now when I was collecting from the rotary drum screen filter that was connected to that tank, I could stabilize that stuff in by the time I got to Rodale, half an hour away. So I was like, oh yeah, this is going to be much better. So again, this is where I was at that point, was I was learning to stabilize this stuff so I could do it much quicker. And produce the level of organisms that I wanted, and get rid of the facultatives. Well, I would always have facultatives in it, but I'd get rid of the anaerobes, the real nasty ones. And that's kind of where I was, parallel to this this microscopy. Anyway, so I don't know. It's probably 3 months in now. Interns are halfway through. Maybe it's only 2 months in, about the same time. The interns are about halfway through their course for that summer. And they were making compost in bioreactors. And by this time, I had made a good friend, another friend, who was kind of parallel to the project, but he wasn't part of the interns. His name was Richard Mitchell, and he had a vermicomposting company. And he was there to study under another scientist who was working on mycorrhizae fungi, as well as learning how to build a business through Rodale, as well as learning more about the biology through Leighton. So he and I became really good friends. And this one night, he was freaking out. We would go. We'd have Thursday morning meetings with the gang, and then Thursday night we'd all go down to a local pub, have a couple beers and some hot wings and stuff. So we were going to go to the bar, and Richard's freaking out. I'm like, "What's the matter, dude? What's the matter?" He goes, "Damn it, my temperature's through the roof again. I really effed this up. I don't know what to do. Elaine's going to kill me in the morning." I go, "Well, why don't you just stab it with a shovel? Like, pop some holes in the side of it so we can get some air in there. And he goes, oh, what a great idea. So he just grabbed his shovel and started stabbing this freaking pile like a maniac. Punched all kinds of holes in it. It was mesh screen, so you could get the broom handle or the shovel handle through it. And oh my God, I was in hysterics, like laughing so hard because he was being a maniac. So finally he gets done. He's sweaty, he's panting, and I go, "Are you ready to go to the bar?" So off to the bar we went. And I would be sitting next to him, and I'd be, talk to me about these bioreactors. What's the story about this? And so she basically explained to me, well, this is a way of thermophilically composting in a manner where you can control the greens and browns, and bottom line is you just add to the top, and then as it gets older, it sinks, and you can like tip the cage over and harvest the compost from the bottom, and then flip it back up and put more material on top. So it's a way of kind of never ending compost. And I was like, oh, cool. So the next Thursday after that was the kids' test, and Richard was a part of the test. And so every one of them had to collect a sample from their compost pile, bring it in, and Elaine microscoped it and basically gave them a grade. And so bottom line was that nobody had grown protozoa, and most of them had grown yeast or anaerobic conditions. So Elaine was mad. She kind of yelled at them all. And so after that, she goes, I want you to start over tomorrow morning immediately. And I need you guys to be able to do this within 30 days before you leave. And so I was like, well, can I do it too, Elaine? She's like, of course you can, Leighton. You understand the concept well enough now, so go for it. So I didn't use a cage. I used what I called it's kind of like along the theories of hugelkulture. So I grabbed an old log, one that was punky, soft, and I laid it down, and then I put rows of newly branches, brand new, like little 3 foot, 4 foot long branches off trees that I'd harvested in the nearest forest. And I kept the leaves on them. So I laid one with the leaves down and then one with the leaves up on top of the log. And I did this across both sides of the log. And then I covered it with hay. And then I started mixing greens and browns and piled it on top of that. And then I basically put a bunch of old wood chips that I'd found off in the corner of one of the fields at Rodale. And I threw the chips on top of it and watered it. And within a couple of days, the temperature had gone back down to about 100 degrees. So instinctively, I just threw a bunch of grass seed on top of it. I also planted a couple ferns and maybe a little conifers that I found in the forest, because I was always foraging around and exploring that area. It was a beautiful part of the world. And so I'd always collect samples, like either forest inoculant or these little saplings or shrubs or whatever, and I'd plant those on my piles. So it really didn't. It looked almost more like a garden than it did, a composting pile. And I watered it, took care of it. And it came time for the Thursday morning test. And so again, all the kids march in with their little, sample of compost. And I march in too. And she looks at all their samples. Richard got a positive grade. He goes, okay, Richard, that's much better than last time. But the rest of the kids got yelled at again. And so I was like, oh, shit, I'm going to get yelled at too. Well, lo and behold, came time for me. Now, I also cheated. I added some fish manure to it. Lo and behold, came time for me, and she put it on the microscope, and then immediately she goes, what the fuck? How did he's not even educated in this, do what you guys have been trying to do for 3 months? I don't understand this. Can you guys explain to me how he could beat you guys in compost making? And then she turned to me and she goes, well, how did you do this, Leighton? I said, well, I cheated. She says, well, what do you mean? I said, well, I built a Hugel compost pile living, we nicknamed it an eco pile, for lack of better words. Richard and I, one night at the bar, nicknamed it an eco pile. And ironically, James Sotelo was sitting at the bar with us and stole that name and was using that and continued to until his death. And even now, Efren Chavez uses the term eco pile, even though it's not anything close to what I built. But needless to say, Mike said, this is what I did. I laid down a log, I put some hay, and then I built my compost on top of it and watered it and planted it. And so right away, she just was like, what am I going to do with you, Leighton? Oh, we had a great Thursday night that night for sure. And at that point, the kids pretty much like hated me. And she told me that night, she goes, Leighton, you're by far the best student I've ever had. And I was like, how could that be, Elaine? I barely graduated high school. Like, they basically passed me because they didn't want me coming back because I asked way too many questions. And she goes, that's the point. You had no preconceived notions. You were not afraid to make a mistake. You questioned everything I did and everything I told you, even though sometimes I was right. Sometimes you proved me wrong when you were playing with these facultative anaerobes. And she explained to me why she can't teach that because of what happened to her in the past. And that's, well, we got time. I'll go into it. When she first got to Oregon State, she had gained a lot of momentum behind the soil food web concept. And she had a student, a graduate. I'm not sure if she was a PhD yet, but either she was or she was going to become one, who studied under Elaine for a whole semester. And they two became friends. And at the end of the semester, her project, and again, I think it was for her PhD, was to demonstrate how compost tea can benefit plant life. And so what she did, though, was she took fresh cow manure, added molasses, and a little bit of water, bubbled it for, I don't know, a couple of days. Wrong. And I poured it on a tree, documented this whole thing, poured it on a tree, killed the tree, and then went back and said, nope, Elaine's idea concept does not work. I killed the tree. And it almost destroyed Dr. Elaine Ingham and her work because this PhD, went around advertising this and, screaming at the top of her lungs, this is bad, it kills things, it's not something we should be playing with. And I believe as the story went, she graduated and then disappeared. And later on surfaced in another environment and apparently very wealthy. And so the thought pattern behind it was that this woman was sent in there as a agent of the synthetic fertilizer companies to damage her career, if not end it. And it damn near did. So after that, she was very, very careful about explaining to people, no, it has to smell good. It has to be aerobic. It can't be anaerobic. You can't take manure and brew it. And especially if you're going to add foods, which is going to make those facultative and those anaerobes explode. And then they're just going to kill everything, in the rise. So that's where she had to, discourage me from really talking too much about what I was doing. She also made it very clear to me that she'd had colleagues that had mysteriously died or gotten into crazy car accidents and or threatened. So she was like, this is, you're fighting a big business that is purely built on lies and mistrust about fertilizers and how we're going to feed the world with our synthetic fertilizers. She goes, they're very, very powerful. So just, be careful, be aware of what you're doing. You are attacking a monster. And so the less you put yourself out there, the better off you are, if you're going to protect yourself. So all this is going on at the same time that Wilkie introduced me to a fertilizer guy on Long Island, who was desperately trying to make compost teas and extracts. He was a follower of Elaine's books. and I've had some success with compost extracts and tea making. And he had 3 very large, very affluent golf courses out on the Long Island coast, out, like not Montauk, but very wealthy part, Sag Harbor. Anyway, they were all out there in these very, very expensive neighborhoods where they were surrounded by the ocean, or streams and rivers that fed into the ocean. And so he was desperate to try to find alternative solutions to NPK because it was being banned in these environmentally sensitive areas because they were wiping out the indigenous oyster, as well as there was a lot of oyster in those areas. So, there was a rally by the farmers as well as the local environmentalists to say, all right, these golf courses, because they're right on the sensitive water, no longer be able to use this. And he was really trying to find somebody that could make this stuff on scale and support his 3 clients out there. And so we rolled in with what I call chocolate water, which is beyond when anybody makes an extract or a tea. Basically, I would take compost. This is another reason why Elaine loved me. I think it was a month in, once I started really understanding compost making, I went bought a washing machine and retrofitted it to be what I called soft collider. So I would put my compost in there, I put some worm castings in, I put my fish manure in, and I'd put it on wash, and I'd wash it for half an hour, and I would screen out the really so I could spray it. So I rolled it with a jug of this, compost extract. So, what is that? And I'm like, oh, well, this is the most powerful thing extract on the planet. And I explained to him why, and he got so excited. And next thing I know, we had another meeting set up for the next day, or not for the next day, the next week. And he never called. And, I called, left messages, nothing, emailed, nothing. And finally I said, Wilkie, you're on Long Island. Can you just go out and see what's going on with this guy? I mean, I thought this was a done deal. He was going to be our first big producer or seller of our product. And Wilkie went out there. He called me a little bit later. He said, look at Leighton. He got shut down. I go, what do you mean he got shut down? Because the fertilizer guys came in and told him, if he has any biologicals on his shelf or recommends any or sells any, they're either going to triple the price of the products that they sell him, or they're going to run him out of business, not sell him anything. And he had like 40 employees. His bullpen was like 12, people doing, estimates and billing. And he was a big company. He was doing, all over New York and Long Island. So he couldn't risk his business for those 3 golf courses and had to, step back from it. And again, this was also parallel to James Sotillo, which is something I'll get into in a little bit. So back to Rodale, we're doing grass trials with Sotillo and my product. We're doing, compost making. Now I'm getting into vermicomposting. I was helping Elaine fix her brewers. She didn't have the right size air pumps for what she was doing. She didn't understand that the depth of the water is more important for the sizing of the pump. It's basically a displacement thing. So I upfit all her brewers with bigger pumps so that now they were producing, the aerobic teas that she liked. We were working with a corn farmer. I mean, we were all over the map down there and kicking ass and taking names. And so the kids go away. It's falls rolls in. So now it's really time to roll up my sleeves and start, really launching this forward. Again, we were still looking at Virginville as our home base and setup, and I went off to Ohio to chase down used restaurant equipment because I knew that I was going to need something bigger than my little washing machine to do this on scale. And although the washing machine could make a lot of product, it was labor intensive because you had to reach in there and clean it out, and every half an hour reset it up. So I wanted something that was a little bit bigger. So I looked at this yogurt maker, and it was unfortunately had a flat bottom, but it had these sweeps that went around the outside edge. And I got them to add another motor with an impeller that shot the stuff down. So it pushed it down. Aeration came up, mixed it, and then the sweeps swept everything off the sides and kept throwing it back into the middle, basically creating like a combustion chamber, right? Same concept. And I fit that into a box truck, along with some screening equipment, my microscope, and a couple of 125-gallon brewers, so that once I made the product, I could just put it right into the brewers, and keep it stable. Because when you have that level of biology in chocolate water, your dissolved oxygen almost crashes immediately. Like, it'll go anaerobic within a few hours, especially if you hadn't diluted it. So I had to have those brewers to stabilize the liquid. Now I got I think it was a 180-gallon yogurt maker, and now I was producing, scale. Basically, I could in half an hour plus the time to clean out and reset, maybe an hour, I could have all of the front two tanks full, ready to go, and I could start another batch. More often than not, I didn't. That 250 gallons of concentrate was more than enough, or 200 gallons, whatever it was. Because remember, I had to add water to wash everything out, so there would be some small amount of dilution. So that was the next level. Now when Sotillo was really coming into play, we had done the grass trials. He had made his own compost tea. He was a tea maker, so he had what's called GOT brewers. You can search it; they're still available to this day. This guy basically took 250-gallon totes, put what we call regenerative blower on the top of them. Blower blew into a compost bag. Compost went in the bag. The blower blew into the bag, and basically the bag was underwater, so it was constantly getting agitated, and that's how basically they made this tea. Now Sotillo would lovingly call it dirty water, because that's what everybody gave him a hard time about. The dirty water did work to some degree, but it didn't have the length. He put it on the soil, everything would green up, they'd do great, and then he would have a slow demise. So he wasn't colonizing. He was more of a biostimulant than a bioinoculant. But on the grass trials, we did side by side NPK, his tea, and my extract. Well, my extract exploded. I mean, it just went wild. So he was like, "All right, I need your product, Leighton, on my projects." Now, he was doing monster projects all over Long Island. He was why I was in the St. Louis Arches. We did rooftops in Chicago, Reagan National Library, other monuments, Battery Park in New York City. Just these incredibly big projects. He was very well connected. He worked for a landscape company, which is the largest unknown landscape company you'll ever see, and it was called. It'll come to me. I'll bring it up when it pops in. And they were the ones in touch with all of these super high-end landscape architects. They were the ones in charge of planting the new tree at Rockefeller Center, which I treated. So these guys were super well connected, and they relied on James to do all of the biologicals, because they had learned they're getting paid so much money to do these jobs that they didn't want to cut any corners, and they had learned that the synthetics were causing a lot of the problems in tree stresses when they're transplanting. And so they've learned that through the biological, through using compost teas, it reduced, if to eliminate, shock, and they had a lot less tree loss. So they were down to like 5% tree loss, where prior to that it was standard operating procedure to understand that you're going to lose 20% of your plant material at a new planting. So by shaving 15%, they were thrilled, because now they already wrote into the contract that 20% plant replacement was part of the number of the project. So when they didn't end up replacing 20% of the plants, that was profit directly in their pocket. So that's when they, really onboarded Sotillo. They bought him a couple more trucks so that he could, drive across country with this product at times. And what Sotillo learned very, very quickly was that he could take my extract, and I was also making solids at the time too, but he could take my extract and times it by 10 in his GOT brewers, because it just expanded, expanded, expanded. It just had so much life in it. All it needed was water and air, and it would continue to grow. And if you added foods, it grew even more. So before I knew it, I was like on literally every one of his projects. And unfortunately for me at the time, I wasn't paying attention to the fact that he was basically keeping me in the shadows on a lot of this stuff, because he was concerned that if word got out, they'd go directly to me and they'd cut him off. And so I understand it. And to be honest with you, he had one of the biggest egos of anyone I ever met, but I understand why. I mean, he was working at such a high level that if you didn't have an ego like that, you wouldn't survive very long. So again, we were talking at that point every single day, testing our knowledge. He had nowhere near the depth of understanding that I did because of Elaine. So sometimes he was picking my brain. Sometimes it was about a new project or a better way to do things. He was talking about using my products to enhance his compost that he could then use in his tea brewing systems. So there was a lot of exchange of intellectual property between the two of us. And again, we became really, really good friends at that point in time. And he was also part of that realization that the fertilizer industry was not messing around with us. And he was insulated from it because of the people he worked for. So it was less of a threat on him, but it was a real threat on trying for him to expand, or for me to expand outside of the small circle that we were working in. But bottom line, at the end of the day, that was what really galvanized my depth of understanding and experience on a level that very few people can get there. Nowadays it's different. There's a lot more awareness out there as far as people producing biologicals. I mean, I'm seeing it a lot on Instagram, on my news cycles, my pop-ups. That more and more people are really getting behind the understanding of biologicals, not biostimulants, but biologicals. And that whole market has exploded in the last 5 years, just absolutely grown exponentially. But more and more now you're seeing, different variations of these vermicompost teas and extracts, jadam preparations, natural farming preparations, on a market, a place, where you can actually get your hands on it. It's not just talk theory and guys in their backyards doing this. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. So needless to say, here we are pumping out these large projects. We go to get financing for Virginville. Once again, it got crazy. I got very nervous. I wasn't really clear on who was actually financing us, and I had an inkling that it was probably not the best people to get involved with. And so I basically just kind of more or less disbanded everything. I just basically said, guys, look, I'm not comfortable in taking that much money in a market where we are a threat to an industry, where we could just literally end up owing all this money and never really get off the ground. And so everybody got pissed at me. The whole team of eight or 10 of us all went our separate ways, including my old partner, who I had deep love and respect for. He and I had been friends and worked off and on together for probably 30 years. But he was pissed, basically thinking that I didn't have the nads to go through with this. But he hadn't been there side by side with me with Elaine. He'd visited periodically, but he wasn't there every day with me. He didn't hear a lot of the backstories of what she told me about, uh, the run-ins that she'd had, and that some of her friends had had. Even deaths as a result of trying to push the soil food web out into the real world. And so, in my mind, I had two problems. I was preparing to take money from someone that's a group that's perhaps not the most scrupulous. So, you do not want to not pay these guys back. All right, put it that way. And two, we're threatening an industry where they don't hesitate to do things to hurt you if you try to buck their narrative. And the fact that at that point, Bill was seriously thinking about shutting down his fish farm because he was getting too old. He kept losing employees. I mean, it's hard work. It's farming. All right. You have that many fish. It's pretty much 24/7, 365. There's no such thing as a day off. It's not a 9 to 5 job. If alarm goes off, you got to get up, rush down to the barn, figure out what's going on, take care of it. If you have an outbreak, and you've got to isolate a tank or isolate certain part of that tank. I mean, it's you can end up working 24 hours straight, no problem, when something happens. So it's not for the lighthearted. And he was at that point starting to hint to me like, "Hey, why don't you take this over?" And I'm like, "Bill, how the hell am I going to do that and build this other business at the same time? There's no way. I'm already working 12 to 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, just developing all these products and learning how to manipulate this stuff and how to do it better, better, and better." So I don't want to give you false hope or promises, but just no way I can commit to managing your barn as well as building a business. So there was all these factors that were happening that was bottom line slowing everything down to a point where I was the bad guy. I was the one that said, guys, I just don't think this makes sense at this time. And I let them all down. But looking back on it, I did us all a favor because there was no way we would have gotten that off the ground. There was guys prior to us that tried to get it off the ground. And Elaine told me stories of this. There was a gentleman down at the Philadelphia Zoo who was taking compost, or taking the manures and composting them, and bagging it up in bagged compost and selling it, locally, and was doing pretty successful. And his plan was actually to take that compost and extract it now because there was a woman in Texas named Betsy Ross, believe it or not. Sustainable Texas, I believe, was the name of her company. She's since passed a couple years ago. Real sad. But she'd built an extractor. So this was a grain fed, like a grain auger. So they put the compost in the grain auger, and then they would power wash it. So they have all these jets on the tube, so that as the auger went by, the power washed the compost to get the organisms off. And so their idea was to start making extracts and run around in tanker trucks and dropping them off at nurseries and landscape companies and so forth. And they invested a lot of money. It got ugly. I think they were in about a million and a half, and they couldn't move enough. There was just not enough demand at that point in time, and so there was a tremendous amount of infighting. There are people out there right now that are still in business, and I'm not going to drop their names because I don't want to hurt them. That were a part of that, and there was a lot of bad blood and a lot of hard feelings. But again, it was like if they couldn't do it, then there was no way we were going to get to do it. And back in Vermont, when we were trying that, we had been in touch with Betsy and talked to her about taking our mulch. We weren't going to mix it with compost. We weren't going to expand it. We were just going to take the core product. And my partner Jim Homer was well, he was in the military, very very high level. He reported only to generals, specifically two of them. So on any exercise that they did, military exercise, Homeboy was in charge of 10 classes of supply. So all 10 supply classes. That means fuel, ammo, housing, food, water, you name it. Everything from being able to repair equipment that broke to giving them milk and cookies at night. And he used to love to tell that story. So he had a lot of high-end contacts, and one of them was with the railroad company. And we actually had a spur not too far from our facility. So we had negotiated with, I forget who the railroad company was. It wasn't CSX, it was some other company at the time, to pick up railroad cars of the mulch or the manure and bring it down to Texas to Betsy because they're still treating stuff in the winter down there. Whereas in New England, everything was frozen solid. So you really only had in Vermont, we had like a 3-month window. In the lower parts of New England, it was more like a 6 to 8 month window for applying product. So we had everything teed up. Everything was ready to go. And unfortunately, again, that went sideways. And again, if we had pulled that off, that system would have worked. And the only reason it would have worked was because we were generating electricity, alternative electricity. We had designed what happens inside a grain silo, right, is when it explodes, it's the same idea as a blast furnace. So you're atomizing the fuel source into a tiny, tiny molecule and throwing it in under high pressure into this furnace, and you're blowing a lot of oxygen in there. So basically, again, we created exactly what happens inside a grain silo that's maintained all the time in this furnace. And this is where Bob Wilkinson came in, because he connected us to a gentleman who had invented the ORC, organic Rankine cycle. So that's how to use waste heat to generate electricity. And so we had, I think, 10 generators. 2 of them were redundant. So we'd have 8 operating at all times. If 2 went down, we could shut it down, turn on the other 2 while we're repairing them. So we had energy, we had food. We had 2 different companies that agreed to anything that we grew, from the hops to the vegetables to the fish. They wanted it all because they understood what we were doing. They got the level of organic growing. Right, this is beyond organic growing. This is biological growing. So, and then on top of that, we would have the ability to make compost as well and treat it with our fish mulch during the months that we could, and otherwise we'd ship the rest down. So we had, I think it was 4 legs, 4 stools, 4 legs of a financial stool. So if one went down, we still had the other 3. So our ROI was like a year and a half on a $25 million note. So, again, that's one of the reasons why we never got in, because we would have just made so much money. It would have been ridiculous. And that's why they wanted the 51%, was because they knew we were going to make a killing, and they wanted it. And if they couldn't have it, then they weren't going to let us have it. But needless to say, when it got down to Virginville, it was another animal. Now we did not have, 4 legs of a stool. We had maybe 2. And again, significant debt, and with questionable people, and again, questionable that we're going to be able to sell as much as we were going to make. And so that again collapsed. Took it with a grain of salt. Went back to the basics. There was a tiff between Elaine and the general manager at the time, whose name was Coach. Coach later went on to run Omri, and that's when Omri really turned into a pay-to-play brand, which sucks because Omri was the go-to for organic stamps, and now you can have urea, you can have all kinds of chemicals in their products. Um, so again, it's got to know everybody. Well, needless to say, Elaine had given us talk, and in the talk there was a story of how she was down in Mexico treating a large, I think it was avocados at the time, and she was making scale compost, and their tractor broke down. And so the way the story went was that basically Elaine had said, well, since she was talking again to an audience. So since the tractor broke down, I called the farmer and said, "Hey, can you get a bunch of workers over here and let's shovel it? We have to hand shovel it. We can't let it go super high thermophilic, or it could spontaneously combust." And so that was considered by somebody in the audience to be racist, that they were going to use Mexican labor to turn a compost pile because the backhoe or the tractor had broken. And so when I found out about that, she and I had a long heart to heart about it. She's like, "Look, I'm done with this. I'm not going to be scapegoated or ridiculed about being honest and open about what I had to do under a certain circumstance. I had no choice, and it's questionable at best. And to this day, we don't know whether that was Coach's bullshit." Because Rodale, shortly after Elaine left, Rodale went in a different direction. They essentially became a wedding venue, party venue, a petting zoo. At that point, also to understand that a lot of the USDA grants that Rodale lived on were drying up. And so there was a reduction in income and a refocus on business plan to a model that would keep the family farm from being forced to be sold because they're not getting the grant money now. And so it was kind of a is what it is, time to move on type scenario. But needless to say, she moved on. She moved out to California. I forget the name of it, to set up a farm, to do continued research that needed to be done that Rodale wasn't going to be doing anymore, with another woman who later they had a falling out. I mean, poor Elaine has been through hell and back as far as perhaps not partnering with the right people or partnering with people that were misleading her. But needless to say, she moved on, and I basically, woke up a couple of days later and was like, "What am I doing here?" I just have received a world-class education, not only from Elaine but other scientists that were there. There was like 3 different scientific groups down there. One mycorrhizae, another was like more focused on carbon sequestering. This is where I really got into the weeds in understanding like long chains, carbon chains, molecules, atoms, all of the things that make up the stuff that is not generally talked about. And it's deep. It's really deep. Like one of the things we're doing right now for ESS is getting a better understanding of, or explaining a better way to understand carbon storage. Back then, they had this machine that they used to bring in and test the soil to measure the carbon that had been stored in these different environments, whether it was synthetic, whether it was organic, whether it was regenerative. They're all different. So, understand that there's a big difference between organic and regenerative. And I used to laugh like crazy because I'm like walking around, in these labs just doing whatever the hell I wanted. I'm like, these guys, they probably never should have given me keys to this place. I could make a mess out of this lab real quick. And sometimes I actually did, but man, did I learn a lot. So, there's where I was at that point. It was like, all right, there's nothing left for me here. I've learned, I had access to the Rodale libraries, you guys. Like I'd go in there and freaking grab books and papers and studies, whatever I wanted. And so, I was immersed for 18 months in this and really, didn't stop, didn't quit, just kept asking more and more questions, deeper and harder ones. So there I was. I'm like, all right, I guess it's time, it's time to move back to Connecticut. And so I had my box truck. I had a 1,000-gallon aquaculture system at Rodale. Oh, that's another funny story. This woman, Kim, she'd been running Rodale for God since the beginning, right? She's like the executive secretary, clerk of the works. She ran everything. One day I went to Elaine. I said, "Hey, I'm worried about Bill's facility. Like I think he's going to shut down, and I don't want that to affect my work. Is it okay if I set up a 1,000-gallon aquaculture system in one of the greenhouses?" And she's like, "Yeah, it shouldn't be a problem. Go up and talk to April and see if she'll let you in her greenhouse." So I went up to talk to April, and she was, she was like a lot of people. She was like, "Man, what you're doing is crazy, but it sounds really, really interesting." And I'm like, "Yeah, so can I have like this back corner over here? Because I noticed you're not really doing much with it." She's like, "Yeah, sure. That way you'll have your own entrance to come and go. You're right by the fans. We don't like to be by the fans because they're too noisy. So yeah, it's no problem. Just set up right over there." So I ordered the tanks that I needed, the 1,000-gallon water tank, this tank that the cone bottom that I was going to make the radial flow filter and a biofilter. Because at this point I'd started to understand that the benefit of having those beads floating around in the biofilter really added to the next level of re-inoculating or maintaining the high level of biology that fish needed. That most people probably don't understand this, but fish have two stomachs, one on the outside. That slime that you feel on them, that's biofilm that is harvesting mineral out of the water. And of course, the one internally that they use to digest whatever they're consuming. So that biological system is critical in healthy fish. And so, I ordered that with the beads and, a pump, a blower, and all the, materials to set up this 1,000-gallon system. And so I ordered it all, shipped to Rodale and didn't think anything of it. Well, like 2 weeks later, I get this call from Kim, just absolutely ripping me apart. I mean, berating me up one side, down the other, to the point where I can't even speak. And I'm like, "All right, Kim, just hang on. I'll be there tomorrow morning. We'll figure this out. We'll figure this out." So I get down there. She's yelling, screaming at me, "What are you doing? You can't just have stuff delivered here. You have no right. Whose permission did you get? Did you get coach's approval?" I mean, just up one side, down the other. And finally, I just said, "No, I talked to Elaine and she said it was fine. Maybe she didn't understand how big a 1,000-gallon aquaculture system is. It's basically like a 8-foot diameter, 3.5 foot tall kiddie pool," which was a nightmare to get in the greenhouse, but that's a whole nother story. So it was a lot of material with all the tanks and everything. So it's half a truckload. Well, not maybe a quarter of a truckload. So obviously it had left some marks on poor Kim. And so after I got her calmed down, explained to her that yeah, I got approval from April. She said that's fine. She gave me a corner. She's not using that corner anyway, and this is the next step in Elaine's experiment, because Elaine had been playing with aquaponics, and so she wanted this, and so eventually Kim calmed down, and as it was the next day I went and got her a box of donuts. That helped a lot, and I did that like literally every time I arrived at Rodale for the next, I don't know, probably 12 months. I would get her a box of hot donuts in the morning, and she would share them with all the big wigs down there. So I had, here I am, got the box truck with all the equipment. I got my 1,000-gallon aquaculture system, and it's like late October, maybe early November. And so, I call Richard, I call Perky, Jim Perkins. I said, "Guys, I'm gonna need some help. I'm gonna take the box truck to Ohio. I'm going to drop off the flat bottom kettle and I'm gonna have it put a cone bottom on it. Then I'm gonna come back to Rodale, and I want to pick up the whole aquaculture system and move it up to Connecticut. And I'm gonna need a lot of hands. And so Perky agreed to drive one of the trucks, which was going to have the biofilter, the tank, and the radial flow filter, and plus all kinds of supplies and stuff, parts and pieces. And I would put two 250-gallon totes in the back of my truck. I still had the brewers up front. I couldn't move those. I still had the microscope on the little bench, but I could fit 2 totes in there. And we're gonna catch all the fish. We're gonna pump the water out of the tank until it's so low that we can easily catch the fish. I'm gonna load up the fish in this box truck. Perky, you're gonna follow me, and we're gonna go up to Connecticut and set it up. Now, I had already set up a landing zone for this. Now, like the bottom of the tank, I had fittings coming out of the bottom of the tank because we were in a sand floor, so it was no problem. So I had to build a platform because now I was going to move it into a garage, which is a whole nother story. And everything had to be up on platforms because the plumbing came out of the bottom. So I built the platforms. I created plastic, walls around it so that the humidity from this aquaculture system wouldn't just melt the sheetrock and rot the inside of the garage out. So I was all set, and so we pulled the trigger. Flew out to Ohio, had them pull the kettle out, start refiguring it. Drove back to Pennsylvania. We loaded up the fish. First thing in the morning, drove up to Connecticut. It was about 3.5 hours, 3-hour drive. And we're having a cold snap. And I'm like, oh my God, it's like midday. I still got to set up the tanks, right? I can't just throw them in there. There's plumbing. I had to cut out holes in the floor, get everything lined up, get everything set. So that once I pumped the tank, the 250-gallon totes out into this, 8-foot diameter tank, that the system was up and running. Because if I didn't do it the way I did it, I probably would have ended up killing the fish. So by the time all this was done, it was 6 o'clock at night, pitch dark. It's getting really, really cold out there, and I'm panicking because I can't get the water warm enough in the tank inside, let alone the tanks. The 250-gallon totes out in the garage or out in the box truck. Temperature was dropping. The water temperature was going down. I didn't have a heater in those things. I tried to rig up a heater, but I only had one, and that one was for the big tank. So I had to keep moving it from tank back and forth between tanks. Somehow, some way, we pulled it off. I think it was probably 10, 11 o'clock at night by the time everything was said and done. All the fish were now back in their 8-foot diameter system. Everything was running, the bubblers, blowers, heating. It didn't get cold enough to kill them, but it got really close. So, that was a big weight off my back. I was like, oh, we did it. Because if I had lost that system, it takes months to get a system up and running. You can't just throw some water in there and throw a whole bunch of fish in there. You'll kill them. There's a biological step that has to happen. Typically, it starts with, believe it or not, urine. You pee into the tank to get the nitrifying bacteria started, and you have to start with really small fish because they have to grow into the system. They have to build the ecosystem as they grow. So if I'd lost that, I would have lost 3, maybe 4 months worth of work. Because the other problem too is getting tilapia fingerlings. They came out of Arizona, and there was a disease at the time, and so the stock had gone way down, and there was people growing these all over the country, big guys, and so they're going to get the priority over me. So there was a threat to even being able to get the fingerlings to start a tank. Needless to say, we pulled it off. Perky and I had a couple beers that night for sure, and now is phase 2 of really building the business. Now that I had everything I needed, I had my fish. I had built a compost pile parallel to my work down at Rodale up at Connecticut. I'd also, was able to purchase worm castings from Richard, and he's the first guy I'd ever met that had truly fungally dominant worm castings. Now, there's a gentleman up in Michigan, Wormies, which I highly recommend this guy. I don't think he's going ballistic up there. He's been building for a number of years, so he may be getting up to speed to do commercial. But prior to him, no, all the worm castings I ever saw were junk. They didn't have a lot of biology. Definitely didn't have fungally dominant matrix that the castings were in. And I really love this, so I'm going to talk about him a little bit more. One of the really cool things that he did was when he would go to organic farmers in the spring, and he would set up a round circle of hay bales, so one hay bale tall, and then he would go collect leaf mold, forest inoculum, chips. Usually he'd seed it with some of his old castings, and some oddball different kinds of compost. And he'd build a little mountain inside this ring of hay bales. And basically the farmer would come by any drops or anything that didn't sell at the farmer's market, and he would just throw it in there, and it would hit the little mountain and roll down to the sides and get stuck between the hay bales and the mountain. And this was the genius of it. The worms came out and fed on that stuff, and then they went back in. So the piles never went anaerobic. They never had problems with, predators coming in and eating the worms, which is kind of typical. If you're outdoor vermicomposting, especially down in New England, there was a lot of birds, a lot of robins and stuff that you had to be really careful about this. So by building the mountain, they could go into the mountain deep enough that the birds couldn't prey on them. And I thought it was absolutely genius. And at the end of the season, in the fall, he'd come back and he'd shovel all of this mountain that had now reduced itself significantly. And obviously there was no more food waste around it. And he would screen it into buckets, and then he'd sell those buckets. Sometimes he had little buckets, and others he had 4-gallon buckets. And that's how he produced his vermicompost. I mean, the farmer did all the work. All he did was set it up and then come back and collect it in the fall. And he had a couple farms that he was doing this on. I mean, it was a genius business plan for anybody listening out there. Because the farmer does all the work for you. Again, all you do is supply the worms, supply the compost that they're going to grow in, supply the hay bales. So it's maybe a day setup in the spring and a day or two breakdown in the fall, and you get yards, like 4 or 5 yards of pure worm castings, and especially if you're doing it at an organic farm. I mean, the value of that is pretty impressive. I think it's going for $1,000 a yard now. So there's $4 or $5 grand work for 2 days work. And maybe a few $100s on hay bales and some other supplies. But anyway, not to get off topic, but I just thought that was important that you understand why I went with him is because of that fungal dominance, and why I recommend Wormies for anybody listening in the state of Michigan. Highly recommend his stuff. I scoped it myself. It's killer. So here I am in Connecticut in my girlfriend's garage with an aquaculture system, and I got my washing machine. I've kind of pushed away from doing the giant monuments with Sotillo. I still was doing some of them, but it was like getting to a point where he was more or less taking advantage. He was just like calling me, demanding this, demanding that. I'm like, dude, you got to give me a couple of days, man. You can't call me and expect me to make this on a Sunday and drive it down to you on a Monday morning, so you can drive it to Chicago on Tuesday morning. That just doesn't work like that. And so we were getting, a little friction between the two of us. And by that point, I had made contact with a landscape architect in Greenwich, Connecticut, very, very high end. And I kind of, through my connections, so my girlfriend at the time's father-in-law was a very, very high-end land developer in New Canaan and Greenwich and that area, very, very wealthy section of land. And so he had been listening to me for a few years talking about soil biology and all this crazy stuff. And he would laugh at me and not meanly, but just tease me like, you're a lunatic. Like, you're so far out there. Well, this job was a problematic site. It had a lot of fill, a lot of crap dumped into it. There were some issues with the soil, and it was on a very sensitive watershed. And so when the landscape architect started talking to Carl about, his phase of the work, because remember, Carl's a developer, so he's in charge of the land, in charge of the excavation, in charge of building the house, and in charge of managing the landscape architect. So Carl said to me, we were at a family dinner, and he said, "Hey, this is what's going on with this property. We're gearing up to start dealing with the land around the house. The house is shelled, windows are in, so we're pretty much not running around with equipment outside anymore. There'll be a little bit here and there, but we're gearing up and ready to start actually installing the soil." And he goes, "Would you be interested?" And here's the scenario, because it's on a sensitive watershed. There's all kinds of groups, both the water district itself as well as environmental groups, because it's right on this, this watershed, which is basically a giant swamp that's protected. No one can build there. And he goes, "We've got a tremendous amount of regulation on us. Is this something that you think you could handle or help me with?" And I'm like, "Sure, I can help you with. Why don't you do this? Set up a meeting with all of these parties, these concerned parties, and I'll basically come in and explain to them, what I do, why I do it, how it works, and how there will be no synthetics used on that property from the time that I start till forever, as long as the homeowner follows suit." And I went in, I talked to all these people, a bunch of questions, but basically I got, a standing ovation. I got gold card to go anywhere, do anything I needed to do. Rubber stamp on all of the permits, no more regulatory capture bullshit. Greenlit the project. And so now I've got the attention of the landscape architect. He's like, "All right, who is this kid? And what's he all about?" And so he corners me and starts questioning me. And I'm like, "Well, yeah, I'm going to be using soil engineering techniques and soil biology techniques to make this project 100% synthetic free, regenerative, building you an ecosystem that, as long as you never use synthetics, it'll water only for life. And it's going to actually clean the rainwater better than it is, because it's going to go through a biofilter before it gets into the lake or the pond that's in the back. And before that pond drains into the watershed." And so he was really interested. He was like, "Wow, okay, this ought to be fun." So now Carl just goes, "All right, you're going to manage that whole side." I'm like, "Well, what do you mean?" He goes, "Well, I'm going to give you all the contractors that are doing, excavation, gas line, anybody that touches the soil, you're in charge of." I'm like, "Okay." He goes, I asked him, I go, "Well, you going to pay me for this?" And he goes, "Yeah, just write out a bill. I don't care what it is." I go, "Really?" He goes, "Yeah, charge $150, $200 an hour. I don't give a shit. Just get it done, and don't slow me down. I need to finish this project on time." So I basically was there for 9 months. I was there to open the gate before anybody got there, and I was the last one off the site, close the gate. And in rain events, I was on the site, managing erosion control, doing all kinds of crazy shit. Didn't matter what time of the day or what time of the night. I literally made so much money on that job that I wiped out all of my divorce debt, earned enough money that I could actually stand back on my feet again. And I built this paradise. And as a matter of fact, you can search it, 266 Michigan Ave, New Canaan, Connecticut. It's an impressive friggin' job. So I had 2 sets of planters. I had 2 different excavation teams. I had 2 different masonry teams. I had an irrigation company. I had all the utility companies. It was chaos and pandemonium, day in, day out. Amazing project, just up my alley. It was just one problem after another, and being able to solve them in light speed was the key to keeping things from falling up. Now, remember, I was a general contractor, so I did this for a living. So it wasn't a stretch. I knew how to set up things. I knew how to build a Gantt chart, which is basically keeping everything on schedule with not putting somebody ahead of where they're supposed to be so that you're going to have to dig it back up. So we pushed through that project, comes out flawless, zero plant loss. When the architect found out that I did it with zero plant loss, he pulled me aside and said, "Kid, what did you do? That's unheard of. We always lose 20% of plants." And so I said, "Well, yeah, I'm kind of aware of that. It's because you shock a lot of them when you fertilize the crap out of them after you just plant them. It's a lot of your management strategies, your SOPs that are the problem. But what I did was, if you noticed, I had all of your big structural trees and stuff brought in a month before they were going to be planted, and I injected them with compost extract. I de-stressed them. I got them off of the heroin that they were on, because when they're in a nursery, these guys at the nurseries are just pounding them with NPK because they want the biggest tree possible to get more money for bigger trees, right? So I'd spend a month detoxing these plants and getting them ready biologically to be planted. And none of them shed leaves. We had no plant shock whatsoever. Right away they responded to being planted, happy as could be. So he's like, I have other jobs. Are you interested? And I was like, well, of course I am, right? You're close to me. I'm not driving to Pennsylvania. I'm not having to drive to friggin' New York City all the time, do these crazy shit jobs that, I'm barely getting paid for. So yeah, I'd love to. And I go, by any chance, did you factor in, 20% plant loss plus the maintenance or the installation, the removal and reinstallation, including the plant? He goes, of course, I have to do that. I go, any chance you want to kick me a little bit? The look on his face was of horror. How dare I ask him to reward me for the job that I did that made him so much fucking money. Fucking rich people. Anyway, so we moved on to another job, and about 4 or 5 months after completion, when I gave the keys to the homeowner, I instructed him and his wife to make sure that they were hiring an organic land care company and that no synthetics were going to be used, because, I had promised all these people, we'd signed all these things that said that you would not be using synthetics in the future. So, please make sure that that happens, or otherwise you're going to have to hire me to come back and fix shit as you kill it. And I go, by the way, I have a compost pile that I built with all of your materials, all the trimmings, the hedges, the grass, the branches. They did a lot of structural pruning. They were making these topiary pieces. I built a compost pile over in the corner, and I will be coming back, in 6 months to, do a maintenance, make sure that everything's looking good. I'll do some direct microscopy, and I'll probably make an extract and spray anything that's marginal or that I think needs a bump. And otherwise, the landscapers, I've told them that, when they're getting ready to remulch anything, to just take some of that compost and spread it around the plant and then mulch over it, so that you're constantly adding nutrient back to your system. And so he was all happy with it. Everything was great. And I came back that 6 months later, and I'm fooling around over the compost pile, and I noticed a white van roll up with the organic landscaping on the side of it, and I noticed 4 guys jump out and throw on backpack sprayers. So I dropped what I was doing. I ran over there and I was like, whoa, 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 what are you guys doing? And, well, no hablo inglés, no hablo inglés. I go, all right, boss, happy. Made them call him. I said, excuse me, these guys looks like they're spraying something. What are they spraying? Oh, it's fine. It's an organic fertilizer. I go, they don't need fertilizer. And by this time they had scattered. They were off spraying everything. And so I just kept questioning and pushing him. And then I started looking in the truck, and I'm like, dude, You got fungicides in here. Oh, well, that stuff's fine. It won't hurt any of that. Dude, you don't understand. I spent 9 months killing myself building this 100% organic soil that's loaded with fungi. And he goes, well, yeah, there's a little problem because there are some mushrooms. So we just want to make sure that the owner doesn't see the mushrooms. I'm like, dude, the mushrooms are as a result of the irrigation guy, which I've been yelling at for 6 months to turn the fucking irrigation back because he's used to watering synthetic systems. This is organic. You need half the water that you normally need. And so I called the landscape architect up and just started barking. I was like, look, this is going on. They just set back this whole property in one day, what took me 9 months plus to build. And I go, the irrigation guy's out of control. I've been over here numerous times turning the irrigation back. And every time I come back, they turn it back up again. And then I didn't realize was the landscape architect was in bed with the irrigation company. Not sexually, just they were tight. The landscape company or the landscape architect was a bigwig, and so was this irrigation guy. They had contacts like you wouldn't believe. So they would trade jobs. Like the irrigation guy would get him into one, he would get in the irrigation guy in another. So they had a really, really tight relationship. So when I started barking about the irrigation company, I got myself in trouble, and to a point where basically I was told your services are no longer needed. And I was just like horrified. I was like, oh my God, I sold my soul to the fucking devil because I got this property built based on 100% organic regenerative practices. And now they're going to go back to 100% synthetic because of the irrigation guy. Right. So needless to say, I was working on another project at this time. Again, I didn't know the irrigation guy and the landscape architect were buddies. So I'm doing this other project down in New Canaan. Forget the address. Needless to say, it was as complicated. I mean, typically these landscape architects, this group loved topiary. So a typical scenario would be they planted a specimen swamp maple and then surrounded it tightly with boxwoods, European boxwoods. And they trimmed the boxwoods so that it looked like this tree was just a lollipop sticking out of this hedge. And they would always have the irrigation for that planting, that topiary, on the same zone. And that was one of the other things that in the beginning I was like, dude, you can't do this. You can't put them on the same zone. The tree wants soaking wet feet. The boxwoods want dry feet. And he goes, look, we've already got 250 zones. I'm not going to double that. The irrigation is already out of control. It's one of the most complex irrigation systems we've ever set up. And I'm like, all right, I got it. I'll engineer the soils. I'll engineer my way out of this. So basically, I would build these multiple soil systems. This is again where the horizontal system comes into play. Why I knew how to build that was because of these scenarios where I was no choice. Things were gonna die if I didn't do what I had to do. So now I'm on another one down in New Canaan. This one was the job was crazy because of some of the features that they did. Again, highly inappropriate. I mean, gorgeous to die for, a maintenance nightmare, a building horror story. And in this particular job, there was this very, very ornate English garden that had an herb collection to die for. All of these, incredibly expensive, some of them rare types of herbs. And it was more of a look at me garden, not a functional garden. Like, I don't know, maybe she did use some of the herbs, but from what I could tell, and I met these people, like I would interact with them because I was there every day, first on, last off. So, I'd form relationships with these people. And then she didn't seem like the master chef to me. Now, maybe she did have a chef that came in and cooked for him, but needless to say, when I was working with the project manager, I started telling him, I'm like, hey, look, we got a situation here. Some of these plants are so invasive, they're just going to push the other ones right out. I'm going to have to do some real creative, fancy footwork here to maintain some of these more aggressive plants from just spreading and taking over everything. And he greenlit me. He said, do whatever you got to do. I don't care. And so I was now building barriers in between the different groups in this very, very complex sacred geometry garden where I couldn't have materials that could be offensive. Like I can't use rows of bricks or build a brick wall so that the plants can't, go under or through sideways into the little bed next to it. So again, forced to come up with some really creative ways to prevent the garden itself from just getting overrun by the really aggressive ones. And again, learning more techniques. Like I was doing some like serious clay, compacted, soaking wet mud clay, pounding and pounding and pounding until it was basically an adobe wall in between the aggressive ones. Or I did them around the aggressive ones so that there was no way these plants were going to get through that into the next beds. So again, a wonderful project. Really excited. I convinced them to let me use organic grass seed instead of sod because I explained to them, look, if you sod, it's going to look great for a year and a half, maybe two. And if you're not overseeding constantly, that grass is going to die because it's chemically grown. It's not suitable for long life. It's fast growing so that you looks great, and then the landscape guys get stuck reseeding and maintaining it. So it's not the right way. So she agreed because she understood what I was doing was more focused on building an ecosystem than just making their house look good. And so she goes, well, the only problem is we have a not a birthday. It was a big event for 4th of July. And I'm like, I promise you that you will be mowing the grass on July 3rd. And if not, I'll pay you 10 grand. And she's like, seriously? I go, yeah. I was making so much money, didn't care. And so they let me do what I wanted, exactly the way I wanted it. And sure as shit, that grass was freaking a carpet on the 3rd when they mowed it. And it was mowed properly. So it wasn't like they mowed down a hayfield. That grass was perfectly at the right height for them to cut off 1/3 of it and still have the grass 3.5 to 4 inches tall, which is what it needs to be when you're in a regenerative system. And they were ecstatic. Everybody loved it. Again, now I'm walking on water again. And now the system's up and running. Everything's beautiful. Basically hand them the keys. Again, I'm like, I have a little compost pile hidden over in that corner. I've told, your landscape contractor or your maintenance guy that, if he's going to do mulching, just put a little of that. I'll be back in a few months to, again, give it a microscope, make sure everything's up and running, and treat anything that needed to be treated. So, same thing. Rolled up 6 months later, organic land care, pesticides or fungicides in the back. Looked around. There's mushrooms, these little inky cap mushrooms, especially in some of the mulch beds because that's where they live. And I'm like, what are you guys doing? I've told you to cut the water back. And again, this time I got a key to the box and I was keeping an eye on it. And I would notice that, there was one guy at that company that would listen to me and understood what I was doing, but he wasn't high enough up that he could manage it. Like when I got into a problem or I had a situation, he would be the guy to come out and fix, repair broken sprinkler heads or whatever else I needed or noticed. So he was on board with me, but bottom line was that the rest of the team was just so programmed to be water, water, water. And now I'm starting to get angry. I'm like, you guys, look, man, you're causing this problem. You're forcing these landscapers to use a product that they shouldn't be using on an ecologically friendly landscape system. So once again, I opened my mouth, probably shouldn't have, and got in trouble. And bottom line was, by this point, I was already on another job. So they had to let me finish that job. But after the third job, I basically walked. I said, look, I'm not going to do this anymore for you people, because it makes me feel horrible that I get you these permits and walk you through these systems where you're promising to be 100% synthetic free. And then as soon as I turn my back, you're overwatering and then spraying fungicides because you have mushrooms, which are actually a good thing. But they didn't understand that. So after the third one, I was done. At that point, it was, I think, about 8 years ago, maybe 7. And the cannabis industry in California was exploding because of legalization. At the time, nobody understood the train was coming off the tracks in a number of years. But at that point, there was a lot of excitement. People were trying to get licenses, and people all about. That's what I loved about cannabis growers. They were all about the plant, whereas the landscapers, they just want to feed it, cut it, mow it, blow it, right? So I thought, oh my God, I found my tribe, man. And at the time, there was this cat who called me up and talked to me about doing a aquaponics conference out in Connecticut. And we talked back and forth, and then he brought me on his podcast. And I'm not going to name him because I don't want to start any shit. That motherfucker, calming down. So I went on his podcast, and I basically, laid out what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, how it works, et cetera, et cetera. Well, this other cat, Joshua Rutherford, heard that podcast and heard me talking about Elaine, and calls me and goes, oh my God, I've been in church basements listening to freaking bootlegged Elaine lecture tapes. And everything you say is you're like parroting everything that she's ever said. And he's like, well, we need to get the word out. We need to, teach people about this. Why don't we do a podcast? And I was like, look, to be honest with you, Joshua, if I can't see the people's eyes, I don't know if they're following me or not. If I'm teaching this, I have to look at you and notice if you're gazing off, or I'm going too fast, or I'm going over your head. I want to stop and reel it back in so that I can teach you, not just lecture you. Lectures are lectures. They're not really teaching you much. And he's like, oh, well, what about a conference? I go, fuck yeah, let's do a conference. And I was like half joking, but lo and behold, he booked a friggin' place in Portland, Oregon. And that was the first ever Science of Organic and Regenerative Cannabis conference that went on for almost 3 years after that. And we did one in BC, did 3 in Humboldt, 2 in Michigan, 2 in Maine. We traveled all over the country doing that gig. And it was very successful, and people loved it because they could party, but they're also getting, like, I brought in Elaine, I brought in Chip. I stoked that thing with the best people I knew that I'd surrounded myself with, to better understanding what it is, when you get into these biogeochemical situations, what is really happening in life. You need an expert in soil chemistry. You need an expert in soil biology. You need someone that understands the particular, materials. Like, how does clay react in this environment? How does sand react in that environment? What are they made up of? Where did you get them? So you need all of those pieces to really be able to lay out a way to explain to people on a deeper level, especially the ones that really want to know. And I've noticed over the years that a lot of cannabis consumers are very intelligent people, and they really want to know the minutia, the weeds, the into the weeds of how all these things are functioning and working together. So we started doing that. I started picking up clients in cannabis. I'm also consulting on other projects back east. So I'm making a living. I'm doing all right, and that essentially, got me to where I am today in Oxnard. And the only reason I ended up in Oxnard was because my love, Pauline, since passed, um, had wanted to go to Ojai, and I was finishing the job with Joshua. I was helping him build a farm up in Bellingham, Washington, and I was on my way down to Santa Fe, New Mexico, where I had two more projects. And so on the way down, I said to her, "Hey, Ojai's a couple 3 hours out of the way. Would you like to, stop and spend the night there? And we'll make it a day trip." And she agreed. So we went to Ojai and spent the night. Next day, I got up and I was talking to some construction workers, and I'm like, because she was looking for relocating. She could not live in Connecticut. There's just too many ticks, too many mosquitoes, too many diseases, and she had no immune system after dealing with cancer. So I said, "Does it get hot here?" Kind of thinking about her, because she was extremely spiritual, and Ojai is a very spiritual place. There's a lot of vortexes up there, a lot of woo-woo stuff. So she would have been perfectly at home. And the guy said, "Oh, yeah, it gets blazing up here in summer. We just go to the beach." And I'm like, "Well, what beach are you talking about?" "No, just roll down the 33 to the 101. You'll be in Ventura." And I'm like Ventura, like the song? And he's like, "Yeah, yeah." So we rolled down to the 33 into the 101, and was like, "Oh my God, this place is heaven." This is December 4th. We got breakfast, took a stroll on the beach. I'm barefoot with my shirt off, and the sun is hot. I'm just going, "Oh my God, this place is heaven." So her sister unfortunately got the flu. So she called us and said, "Don't rush down here. Take your time." So we ended up spending 2 days in Oxnard on the beach at this resort right up the street here. And we started looking around, and Pauline just fell in love with the place. And so we rolled out, got down to New Mexico, started working with one of my clients, connected with my buddy Charlie Schultz and some of the crew over at New Mexico, what is it called? Santa Fe Community College. And now she's obsessed. So she's, calling realtors, looking at properties every day. She bummed out, lost a couple, and just spirit was crushed. I'm like, "Pauline, look, if it's supposed to happen, it'll happen. Just stop pushing it. Let it go. Let it go." She promised to let it go. She stopped looking. 3 days later, one of the realtors called her and said, "Hey, I know this woman who's renting a place. Do you want her information?" So she said, "Yes, please." So that was the landlord that we moved in on, Deb Zoomerling. She gave us her number. I called her right away. I said, "Here, what do you need?" Gave her all my credit information. She called back within 24 hours. "Your credit's fantastic. When would you like to move in?" I said, "Well, we'd like to move in, March 1st. And she's like, "Oh, I can't do that. How about April 1st?" I'm like, "Look, even if I lose a couple days, I don't care. I want to get in there as fast as possible." And she's like, "Well, I think I could have it ready for you on the 4th, but you're going to lose 4 days." I go, "Look, Deb, I don't care about the 4 days. It's not about the money. That is the perfect place for us and Poe, our dog. We've scoped the area. You've got a backyard. It's perfect. We want it. Let's get this done." So we rented the place, rolled in on March 4th. On March 6th, they shut the world down to COVID. And Pauline and I spent months researching, walking on the beach, playing with Poe while the world was locked down. So I was just so blessed to be trapped in Oxnard during that shit show. And a few months into it, I realized, okay, look, this isn't going to go away anytime soon. I better start, figuring out how I'm going to make a living around here. And then I just started really paying attention, going to compost yards, created connections at Peach Hill Soils, at Agarman Soils, put on the first ever Ventura County Compost Cup, which I hosted at the house. And that really kind of secured me into Oxnard. And to be honest with you, I don't ever want to leave here. This place is absolutely heaven. And, that's pretty much how I got to where I am today. And again, the reason I do these podcasts is because it's so important to me to make sure that I can give back as much as I was given. Because at the end of the day, I received way more than I got, or I received way more than I gave. Even though I do these podcasts, I put a lot of energy into the work. I also do a lot of volunteer work. I give people free information when they need it. But I still have received way more in my life than I feel like I've given. So that's how I am where I am. And it looks like there's some questions, and we got 10 minutes. So Ken, if you want to hop on.
Sure. Yeah, what an amazing story and development of your knowledge and understanding that lead you to where you are now. Amazing journey, Leighton.
Well, again, it all starts with trusting. Trust the system, trust the cosmos, however God, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, you're going to have ups and downs. You're going to have bad days. Don't get me wrong. It wasn't all fluff and tough. Or there were times it was absolutely brutal, being $150,000 in credit card debt and no way to fucking pay it. Right? I've been there a number of times in my life. So don't think it was just all fun and glory. But when I hit those places, I landed that 266 Michigan. That took me out of that hole. That was 150 in credit card debt. People, think about that. That's over $5,000 a month in minimums, just minimums. And I could only work 6 months a year in New England because it's frozen the rest of the time. And then recently, same thing out here during COVID. I just buried us in debt because Pauline couldn't work. I couldn't work. The stupid little friggin' check they sent me was a joke. And so we ended up I was buried again. And I landed a project that they asked me to spray compost tea on. And it turned into a 1.5 year long regenerative orchard and landscape. And again, dug my way out. So you got to trust the system. Even though you think you're at your wit's end, you just can't give up. You got to stay positive, man. And I hope people hear that. It's all about being positive. If you stay positive, positivity will come to you.
Mm-hmm. And that's the thing. That's why we talk about energy, frequency, vibration, and staying positive. But we better get into these questions. It's mainly Cass.
What's up, Cass?
He had to leave the rotten bugger, so he'll have to come back and watch. But was the fish system at Rodale a home system or bigger?
It would have been bigger. 1,000 gallons is no joke. That's a big system. Come on.
So his next one is, how do you bubble these fish inoculants?
So you use, I like linear air pumps because they're just indestructible. And you can get quite large ones. Like I can bubble 225-gallon brewers. And if you understand the water column, it's almost 5.5 feet tall. That's a lot of pressure. And I could bubble 2 of them at once with one of these linear air pumps. The others are regenerative blowers when you get into these giant 100,000, 20,000 gallon tanks. Those are a little bit more fussy and they generate a lot of heat. So you have to do something to kind of cool it before you introduce it to the water temperature, or you can affect the water temperature, or you have to have a sophisticated system to maintain it.
Okay. Then we're going for the compost teas. How long do you spin it? Around 24, 48, 72, depends on etc. Is incoming heat from air pump an actual issue?
All right. So when I'm spinning, that I'm making an extract, not a tea. Mm-hmm. So it's 30 minutes in the system, and I've found that that's the sweet spot. If I leave it in longer, it really doesn't do much. If I take it out earlier, I don't extract everything that I want. So that's about half an hour in the washing machine. Now I have an extract that I have to maintain bubbling. I've maintained it up for 9 months without any loss of organisms. So it's stable as long as I'm bubbling it. As soon as I add foods, it expands like crazy, and it can go anaerobic if I'm not careful. But typically tea brewing, you should brew no longer than 30 hours, and then you need to use it by hour 36, or you're going to have the biological oxygen demand go up too high and crash, and then it's going to go anaerobic, and you're going to have a nightmare.
Yeah, and that's one thing when you're feeding your fish, guys, in an aquaponic system, the oxygen is going to go down, so it's a good time to put in more oxygen when you're feeding to maintain, just to let you guys know. Then how big was the fish farm in terms of selling products post the lane?
It was parallel to Elaine. He had, I think it was close to, each system was probably 40,000. There was 12 of them. So 400, 500,000 gallon system. It's a big system. It's no joke.
Mm-hmm.
Tamacra, Pennsylvania. That's where that one was.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I've seen them in just massive amounts, tens of thousands of gallons in tilapia farms, in warehouses, not even in
Yep. Ponds.
Yeah, just amazing stuff. Because in Canada, to do it here, it's got to all be indoors.
Yeah, yes.
Temperature.
Yep.
Yeah. So, what is considered synthetic?
So that would be salt-based fertilizers. So anything that has an NPK rating of 10 or greater would be considered a salt-based product. So if you get a 25, 25, 25, that's pure poison.
Yeah. Which kind of leads into this one. Do you consider compost being biological or chemical, NPK, etc.?
They're both. All right. So it's hard to make biological compost. It's easy to make compost that has a fertilizer value to it. Comparing NPK to compost has been a real challenge. And Craig Trester and I have been working diligently at this and through a lot of testing to come up with a comparison. And it's been a challenge. He's been working his ass off on this. But we believe we have a way now that we can actually calculate that. Because that's always been an issue since I started with ESS. Well, how do we compare ourselves to NPK? And I'm like, you're not NPK. You're not NPK. The only way to really compare it is go CNPK, carbon, right, before the NPK. And what that does is that shifts your mind to, okay, what was pre-NPK? Now you're talking soil food web. So you're not dealing with NPK. Mm-hmm. NPK is a unit of measurement created by the fertilizer companies to fuck you over.
Well, that's it for the question. But guys, Leighton was talking about when Elaine moved to California and started the farm there. One of the people that set that farm up, his name's Robert Baxley. I had him on Conversations with Ken in Ken's Cafe here on March 22nd. So you might want to check out that episode because we talk about that and how he got into there, helping the Elaine set all that up.
Did he go on with her to Soil Food Web School?
Not sure if he did or not. But he actually, when she had sold it, the people that bought it actually called him in as a consultant. So he actually got to go back and work on the farm again.
Interesting. So that was Carol that bought it, right?
I believe that's what it was. Yeah.
And interestingly enough, Carol's husband created a compost extractor or brewer, not extractor, not all stainless steel on wheels. Badass little system, but talk about expensive. Jesus. The ROI on that would have been your lifetime.
Yep. Well, that's the thing. You can make it, hugely expensive, or you can make it actually really cheap, depending on your availability of materials and your brain to make it happen. Like, using an old clothes washer, makes so much more sense for, an ROI.
Yeah. Or there's 5-gallon water bottles. Just cut the top off, cap the bottom, add the aeration with a ball valve, and now you got a 5-gallon brewer for almost free. So there's a lot of ways to repurpose stuff without spending a fortune. Just got to be a little handy and creative.
Yep. Creative. Get back into that child mode where, you can just create things in your mind.
Well, it was, I didn't even look at the chat because I was just so in my head. So I don't know how it was received, but.
Very well. Very well.
Thanks for listening, people.
And even Perky came on and was mentioning that, the trip and setting up and everything took 20 hours. And, You know, it was great.
I didn't know he popped on the chat.
Yep.
Nice. How did he know? Oh, probably through Instagram. That's probably how.
Well, he was on Facebook.
Okay.
He came through Facebook. And yes, guys, he is going to be coming back on. And the people that got Leighton's chorus, it runs through Perky's website, and he's reinvigorating that website, so you'll have access again, hopefully soon. But for next week, Yellow Skunk Farms was actually in the chat. Yellow Skunk Farms is coming on with Leighton next week to talk about his grow and why he has a creek running through his indoor grow. Then we also, the week after that, we have Matt, who's on right now as well. And he's saying thanks, Leighton. Matt's coming back on with his new microscope. And
epifluorescent, right?
Yeah, he says he can track when rhizosphere, the spores connect with the terms just aren't coming into my head.
That's all right. We'll get into it next or 2 weeks.
In 2 weeks, yeah, exactly. As for conversations in Ken's Cafe, I'll be coming up with the topic for tomorrow. You guys help me out here. Send me guests. That would really help out. But anyway, guys, Leighton, fantastic story, my friend. You really helped a lot of people, with your steps of your life and how everything has went, to show that anything's possible if you keep going and going.
Anything is possible. Just don't give up. Don't go negative. Stay positive. Stay true to yourself. Don't sell your soul, and have trust that the universe is there to help you when you need it. But you got to keep the faith.
That's the key, is keeping that vibration high to accept stuff coming in.
Exactly.
Okay, guys, we're over the 2 hours. So, Leighton, last words, brother.
I hope I was inspiring. I hope I gave people some depth in their faith and hope, and inspiration to just keep pushing through the shit. Because let's face it, there was a lot of shit getting pushed around these days.
Yep. And there's a lot of shit that happens in behind the scenes that, hold this back. But we're breaking through, guys. Slowly but surely, we're breaking through. Guys, ending the stream. We'll see you guys tomorrow. And don't hesitate to leave comments after the show. Ask questions, etc. Maybe I can cover some of your questions on Conversations in Ken's Cafe. Anyway, guys, peace out. We'll see you tomorrow. You bet.